Okay, so this session is called Managing Relationships to Maximize Success, right? Managing relationships. I've had almost 20 years of experience in the financial industry, and what I'm going to share with you today are nuggets that I've picked up over the course of the 20 years. But before I start, I just want to share with you the impression that I got when I walked in today. I walked into this building thinking, there was a tube strike yesterday, will many people come? I'm not sure. And then I saw the crowd and the sea of faces, and that made me feel so proud. So one, I have to commend BYP Network. If you create the space and opportunities, people will come. Secondly, I have to commend my firm, Morgan Stanley. When they decided to be a gold sponsor and support this conference, which is all focused on truth to power and the development of leadership and the next generation of leadership, that showed me that when we added our fifth core value of committing to diversity and inclusion, it wasn't just a banner. They were literally putting their money where their mouth was. And so I really hope that we will be a sponsor, not just this year, but for many years to come. I see the HR folks, so let's clap it up.
Point and moment. I do apologise. I just need to let everybody know that there is also going on upstairs in the lower river room. The Why Mentorship coaching is for everyone. So if anybody did want to make that, now is your chance. Sorry to interrupt. Please carry on.
No worries.
Bye.
Thank you.
I'm so glad I gave a shout out to BYP. Now they're saying, please leave. But I appreciate you staying. So, first I'm going to introduce myself, and then my hope is by the time each of you leave here today, you are going to be absolute masters in figuring out how to get amazing relationships within your organizations and how you're going to leverage those relationships over the course of your career. And this applies to you whether or not you are just starting, if you're a graduate, or if you're mid-level in your career, or if you are making that pivot into senior management. So my name is Ize Idemudia. My Nigerian name is Ize Idemudia. But over the course of the years, Ize Idemudia has stuck. I'm a managing director at Morgan Stanley. I'm so proud to say that because last year, I wasn't a managing director at Morgan Stanley. I was an executive director at Morgan Stanley. Thank you. Thank you. And after this experience next year, I'm going to be Oprah. I'm just going to put it out there right now. So I've been at Morgan Stanley for 7 years. I'm a lawyer by background, but I'm currently the Chief Operating Officer of International Legal, so that's everything outside of the Americas, and asset management legal globally. My path to getting to where I am was completely unconventional. So I qualified as a lawyer, but my first experience in law was doing an internship at a Magic Circle firm, and when I got there, I discovered that I was the only. I was the only black woman who was an intern, and I was the only intern who wasn't from an Oxford University. So imagine my surprise when my first day someone said, "Oh, what uni did you go to?" And I proudly said, "I went to the University of Wales, Swansea, where I'm studying law." And she said, "Swansea? Huh, I'm at Oxford." And off she walked, and I thought, "Ow, wow, okay." And that informed a couple of things in me. I was like, okay, this is probably not my crew or my tribe, as Lady Phil mentioned in the last session. And I also thought, okay, there's something different here. And then as I looked around the organization, I saw no one who looked like me in senior leadership positions. And so those two things informed me that I don't really have a space here or I'm not going to progress. And so I decided that I didn't want to work in a law firm. And so I took the non-traditional path of not working in a law firm. Instead, I took my skills and I worked in-house in banks. And I did a combination of legal roles and compliance roles. And the one thing that I've always taken with me is that feeling of making sure that no one else experiences that feeling of not belonging. and not seeing role models. And so from a very early on in my career, I made it my passion and my goal to make sure that other people, particularly people who looked like me, felt like they belonged, felt like they had a tribe, and felt like they had a role model to aspire to. And so in this session, I want every single person in this room to feel the same thing. If you don't see it, that means it's up to you to create that. It's up to you to be the role model, and it's up to you to advocate for others to feel like they belong. So that was a little segue. So now I'm the Chief Operating Officer, and funnily enough, I get to meet with the managing partner of that very law firm and decide on whether or not they get to do work with us. So imagine how roles change. So the first thing I want to cover is relationships, right? What are they? How do you create relationships? And how do you nurture them? So from my perspective, in every career, there are 3 fundamentals that you need. The first one is a given, performance. You have to be good at what you do, okay? Unequivocally, be good at what you do. The 2 other things are super important. The second thing is your brand. So that's your reputation, how you perform, how people perceive you, how you carry yourself. The third is your relationship capital. Your relationship capital is super important, and from the day you graduate university, you should be thinking about how you nurture and develop those relationships. So I'd say that, actually, a really good quote I heard recently is that you should think about your career as a company, right? Let's call it Me Inc. And the CEO of Me Inc. is you. And every good CEO surrounds themselves with an amazing board of directors. But the board that they're looking for aren't people who look like them or sound like them or have the same ideas. You want a variety. You want diversity in your board. You want the best thinkers. You want the best risk managers. You want the best advisors. So why should it be any different for your careers? So when you think about your relationships, think about building your board of directors. And your board of directors are your mentors and your sponsors who take you through your career. So I'm going to segue very quickly into the distinction between mentors and sponsors. If you're more seasoned in your career, you already know this, so I'm actually addressing this to any students or people who haven't had a mentor yet. Actually, just by show of hands, how many people here have a mentor or think they have a mentor? Okay, it's a good chunk. So effectively, your mentors are advisors, coaches, connectors who can guide you through everyday matters in your career, right? They can be in your group, they can be outside of your organization, they could be in your family, more junior to you, peers, and they're people who you usually go and bounce ideas off, right? I'm thinking of doing this. I'm thinking of sending this career-ending email. What do you think? And they're the honest people who are like, I wouldn't do that if I was you. So that's your mentor. Your sponsor, on the other hand, is someone who is more senior, has a lot of influence, and is willing to risk their own reputational capital on making sure that you are successful, right? And typically that person will be in your line of management. So the analogy I usually use is, let's say your career is a maze, and in the maze there's loads of doors, and you have to find keys and open the doors until you get to the end. Your mentor comes along with you and helps you find the keys. Your sponsor makes the doors disappear. So you just walk on through. Your mentors, you typically will pick your mentors, and they could be informal mentors, so people you already bounce ideas off, or it could be a formal setting. You approach your manager and you say, look, I'm looking for a mentor. Your sponsors will typically pick you. And the reason they do that is because there is a spark. There's something in you that that sponsor sees, that reminds them of themselves, right? They see a spark. That person's really hardworking. I love the way they, approach that. That really reminds me I was really scrappy, and I want to see them being successful. Your mentors, when you pick your mentors, think about what it is that you need in your career at that moment. And also think about whether you need this mentor long-term or short-term? So I'll give you an example. When I first started in investment banking many moons ago in New York, I suddenly thought, I really don't know how to navigate this environment, and I need someone who understands the organization. So I put my hand up and I said, hi, manager, I'd really love a mentor. And he's like, great, I found the perfect person for you, and paired me with this woman. And when I walked in to meet her for the first time, I was shocked. She was a 30-year veteran. She was white and Jewish. And I suddenly thought, what was my manager thinking? Like, we've got nothing in common. What am I going to talk to her about? And so I was like, all right, go in with an open mind. She was one of the most important and impactful people in my career. She was amazing. And the reason is because we were so different. And I actually think the difference is the magic. So when you're picking a mentor, try and pick someone who's completely opposite, comes from a different background, because I think that when two people reach across, despite their differences, to try and find commonality, that is where the magic is. That is where the magic is. So as you set off and you start thinking about who's going to sit on your board, who in your life is already giving you advice and guidance, who in your life is already coaching you, or who in your organization inspires you so much that you want to be a little bit more like them, those are the people you want to sit on your board. Now, a question I often get is, all right, so if I can't pick my sponsor, right, within this community, we're probably the most over-mentored and under-sponsored within organizations. So how do you create that spark, right? How do you remind someone of their younger self? It's a challenge. So nowadays, we have a lot of programs where we manufacture that relationship, right? There are loads of sponsoring programs. Hey, we're going to pair you with this individual. But I think the fundamental still remains the same. You have to develop a relationship, and one of trust and openness. And the only way to do that is to be authentic, to be yourself. When you meet with that person, you have to be absolutely open. What are your aspirations? Who are you as an individual? What is interesting about you? Why should they invest their reputational capital on you? And the only way you can do that is over time. Ask them questions, be open, be authentic. The second thing I want to say is you have to create opportunities for that spark to happen as well. So I'll give you an example. My sponsor, who is currently my manager, 7 years ago, I never thought I'd work for him. He is from Liverpool. He loves Liverpool football. I don't know much about football. I think I've been to Liverpool once. But what I noticed is, as the head of our division, every once in a while, he would walk the floors and just go up to people and say, hi, how are you doing? Hi. And I would watch as people would say, I'm fine, and just cower. They wouldn't say anything else. And I thought, how odd. Isn't he just a human being? Like, how weird. So I said, okay, if he ever comes to me one day and says, hey, how are you doing? Number one, I'm going to say I'm fine. How are you? And number two, I'm going to be prepared to tell him about what I'm working on, like something I find interesting. And so every time he stopped by, I would say, how are you? And he would reciprocate, I'm fine, or I'm not fine, or Liverpool lost today. And then I'd tell him about, an interesting thing I was working on. What I didn't realize was that I was literally nurturing a sponsorship relationship. I had no idea. I thought I was just being different, maybe a bit cheeky, and having a conversation. So fast forward to 3 years ago, when I was at a career gate, and I was actually about to leave the organization, and he called me into his office, and he said, what are you doing? And I said, well, to be honest with you, I've been approached with this offer. And he said, no, come and work for me. And I was like, come and work for you? You've never worked for me one day. You don't really know what I can do. And what would I do? And he said, don't worry about it. It's going to be fun and challenging. And I was like, I have an in-depth job description or fun and challenging. Like, how am I going to do that? But in the end, I went for the job. And it has been unbelievably challenging, unbelievably fun. And it's put me so far out of my comfort zone that I can't actually believe I'm on stage having a conversation with you all right now. Thank you. But that's a long way of saying that something in those conversations generated the spark. And so never, ever underestimate your interactions with people in your organization. And if someone says, how are you doing? Bring yourself into the conversation. I am great. How are you? Tell them about yourself, even if their weekend wasn't the same as yours, you know. On the weekend, I went to go and visit my dad. He's Nigerian, he's from Benin. We have the Edo, like Igwe festival, and it starts a conversation. And the other thing that this room has that most people don't is a superpower of sometimes being the only. Now in my career, I realize how much of a superpower that is. Being the only means that you have a unique advantage of bringing a different perspective, different background, different understanding to a room where it otherwise wouldn't be. And if you don't speak up, and if you don't bring it, if you don't show it, you are robbing your organization and your team of the opportunity to grow. So always think about that. So I think we're done now on mentors and sponsors. So you know what they are. You know how to start developing them. I'd also say that you should leverage any networks within your organization. They are a fantastic way of meeting people. So I joined the Black Network at Morgan Stanley. And it took my network from only being in legal to being exposed to the rest of the firm. And when there are issues, it was a network I could call on. And when, most importantly, there were challenges or failures, it was again a network that I could call on. So really think about how you can take advantage of natural networking opportunities within your organization to get yourself out there and to build like a much bigger awareness and also build your profile across the organization. So there's one more relationship that I think is super important to talk about, and that is the relationship with your manager. So as we all know, and I suspect that if people came to this session, there's something about managing difficult relationships that they want to solve. So the manager is the magic, right? Our chief HR officer always says that, Mandel Crawley. He says the manager is the magic. And what I've observed in my role as COO is that when people leave organizations, it's not because they're unhappy with the organization, they're unhappy with their manager or their relationship with their manager. So fundamentally, it's something that you have to nurture. Now, I do understand, you know, there's only so much you can do, and if it's not healthy, and if it's not positive, then there's a point at which you have to think, okay, is this beneficial, or do I need to cut ties? But most of the time, I think that you can actually manage a tough relationship with a manager. And it all boils down to one thing: having an alignment of your goals and their priorities. Even the worst manager in the world, if you are delivering something that feeds into their priorities, that helps them look like they're on top of things, you're invaluable. You're invaluable. So if you have a great relationship with your manager, fantastic, and carry on. But if you need to develop that relationship, you need to make sure that you start from a place where your goals and their priorities are aligned. And the only way you can do that is, one, through communication, regular communication, and two, feedback. So in communication, you want to make sure that you are meeting regularly with your manager, right? At the beginning of the year, you're checking in. What are the priorities? Once they download the priorities, you need to make sure that whatever you set up as your goals for that year, they impact the priorities. And how do you know whether they do? You ask your manager. So if I'm doing A, B, and C, does that help us achieve the priorities? A fantastic example of where this doesn't happen is, I remember a manager, who shall be unnamed, but they'll be so surprised to see me on this stage again, whereby I went in and I was like, I organized these meetings, and I followed up with so-and-so, and I actually approached this person who said that they really want to see this, and so I'm working on it, and I thought he was going to be so excited and so happy, like I was adding value and going above and beyond. And he's like, but I didn't ask you to do this. And I was crushed. I was like, what do you mean? Like, I am literally killing it. Like, I'm doing stuff for this team. And he's like, that's not what I want. And so imagine, I'm disappointed. He's pissed off. It was not a good situation. But now that I'm a manager, I fully understand. As a manager, you have your own priorities. And the reason why you build out a team is you're looking for people who are able to drive those forward. So if you're doing stuff that's going east and your manager's trying to go west, no good. So make sure that they're aligned. Now, there are times when your own personal objectives may not be fulfilled by what your manager wants to do. I think that's fine. Again, communication. If in those catch-up meetings you're constantly saying, hey, just so you know, if there are ever any opportunities to do A, B, and C, I'd be very interested. In your mentoring relationships, you should make your mentors aware of what your aspirations are. And if you're even more strategic, you pick mentors who are within that sphere of influence of your manager. So once they know, they'll say to your manager, hey, did you know that Ize was really interested in doing X, Y, and Z? Oh, no, she never mentioned it. Now they know. Now they know. And then the last one is feedback. I really want to touch on this because, again, within our community, I often see that we are robbed of feedback. People find it so difficult to give direct feedback because they think we're going to be sensitive. I'm going to become an angry black woman. What do you mean I didn't do it? And it just becomes super awkward. We know that. So 2 things that you can do. Create a space for feedback. Signpost it. Not in the meeting saying, hey, how do you think I did? Give them some space. Would you mind if in a couple of days I just put some time in, I really want to kind of get your thoughts on how that went, right? Even a bad manager will appreciate you saying you're giving them a couple of days to prepare. And when you're in the meeting, if they're still struggling to give you feedback and they're like, oh, no, that was great, everything was fine, dig deeper. When you say everything was fine, was it in the way I delivered it? Was it in the content? Right? And if they're like, oh, yeah, no, everything was brilliant, you use the Mia method. Mia's going to be so pissed that I brought her name into this. But a good friend of mine actually opened my eyes to this. She says, you deliver your perception on how it went. If people don't give you feedback, you can say, well, let me tell you how I thought it went. I thought I could have done better on this piece, and I thought I really nailed it on that piece. That gives people permission to either agree or disagree with you. And you'll find that they'll then remember all of the 10,000 things that you could have done in the meeting when beforehand they were like, you were great, it was fine. So really try and get regular feedback from your manager. So 3 things. Align your goals with their priorities, communicate regularly, and really open the door to getting feedback. Now that we've covered that, I'm going to move on a little bit to how you shine your light on yourself. So another thing that we're not very good at, I see a note saying, please go to Q&A. Okay, I'll be really quick on this one. Shining a light on yourself. So in particular, black women, we are terrible at highlighting all of the amazing things that we do, right? That ends today. That ends today. Your board of directors also double as your hype crew and your PR department. So whatever you're doing, whenever you meet with your mentor, you need to tell them the 3 things that you smashed that week. Keep a list. Every time you meet with that manager, you need to tell them the 3 things that you smashed that week. Your sponsor, when you finally meet them and you recognize that they're your sponsor, you need to tell them the 3 things that you smashed that week. Own that narrative. And the more you get used to doing that, the more you'll get used to doing it on a bigger platform. Don't wait for other people to hype you. You need to feed that out. And again, hopefully, if they're in the right sphere of influence, they'll be feeding that information to your manager and to the decision makers in your career. Okay, I'm going to pause now. Q&A. Thank you.
So if you have questions, please can you use the QR code and send the questions via Slidos. We've got some questions already. One of the questions is, can you be too old to have your first mentor?
Never. Never, ever. But actually, I might, you know, throw that back and say you probably have not realized that you've actually always had mentors. The number of people who think they don't have mentors. When things go wrong, who do you pick up the phone to and call? That's a mentor. My mum is on my board of directors. Before I make any key decisions, I will call her amongst others and say, what do you think? She has never one day worked in a corporate organization or a financial institution, and she's given me some of the soundest advice that I apply today. So no, it is not too late, or you can never be too old to have a mentor, but I probably think they have a mentor already.
Thank you. And the next question is, what are your thoughts on reverse mentoring? Do you think reverse mentoring is beneficial?
I love it. So I've done reverse mentoring twice. I think you get out of it what both sides want to put into it, and I think the structure of it is also very important. The negative is if you have reverse mentoring for reverse mentoring's sake, right? Because the onus is on the reverse mentor, who's the more junior person, to share their experiences with someone who's more senior, and it's typically in the same organization. And you're really putting yourself on the line in doing that. And if there isn't a proper framework, you can find someone who's more junior having to explain to like an MD or maybe even a board member of the organization, like, this is what I experience every day. And if it's not received well, right, it creates like a lack of credibility, a lack of trust in the organization, and you've also had someone at the beginning of their career like feeling exposed. So I think if done well, and if both sides really understand what the purpose is, if both sides go in with an open mind, and then critically, if the information shared by the mentor is actually taken on board and addressed, because there's nothing worse than our community being asked to again and again talk about what the challenges are in progressing in your career, and then nothing happens. So I'm a massive fan of it if it works well and if it's done properly, but I do not like it if it's done just for the sake of doing it.
Another question from the audience is, how do you ask someone to be your mentor if you've not had any prior close interactions with them?
Oh, that's a good one. You know what? It's like asking someone to the prom. No, look, I think just be honest about why you want them to be your mentor. What I love is when people come up to me saying, I've watched you do X, and I really want to improve on the way I do that. Would you mind spending a couple of sessions with me just to talk me through how you do that? It's targeted, I understand what they're trying to achieve, and I feel like I can help. And I would never say no, right? Unless I literally had no time, I would never say no. What I don't like is when people reach out and they're like, hey, I'd love to have a coffee just to get to know you, and would you be my mentor? And you're like, okay. And you make time, and each mentoring relationship, they're literally just chatting. Just like, hey, how's your day? How's it going? Oh, I'm good. And you're waiting for them to ask you, and nothing happens, right? I think that's frustrating because every mentor is giving a valuable gift of time to help you address or achieve something. And if you're not going in with the same mindset of, I'm taking valuable time, let's make the most of it, it can become a bit frustrating. But if you signpost and say, look, I just want to have a couple of coffees so I can get to meet another black woman in the organization, I think that's fair because you've signposted what it is. So I think you need to be clear on what you're trying to achieve. And the mentor also needs to be very honest about whether they have the bandwidth and whether they can do it, and use that time, value that time.
Another question from the audience is, could you please share a story about your career setbacks, any career setbacks that you've experienced, and also how you overcame them?
Oh, I love that. This is like a therapy session, except for none of you are getting paid by the hour. So a career setback. The biggest career setback I had actually preceded the role that I have now. And I was working in this team, And I dedicated about 10 years in that space to building up my knowledge, building up my skills, and one day being the head of this function. And so one day I get called in, and my then manager says, hey, I've got news. I'm leaving. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm so sad. Not. And he's just like, you know, so my role's going to be open. I thought, wow, this is amazing. This is amazing. And I did nothing. I just thought, this is amazing. Someone's going to tap me on the shoulder and be like, Ize, bring, you should be the manager. Of course, that didn't happen. No one tapped me on the shoulder. And then a mentor said to me, but have you actually put your hand up and asked for the role? And I was like, no, why would I? Like, it's so obvious. I've been here for 10 years. Like, you know, clearly I want the role. And they're like, but you haven't asked for it, so who knows? Like, no one's a mind reader. And that's another thing about communication. Don't assume people can read your mind. You have to articulate what you want. And so then I summon up all the courage, and I go in, and I was like, I want to be head of this group. And I was told, no, you can't be head of this group because you're not ready yet. And that crushed me. It crushed me. And so when I said I got, you know, an opportunity to go into another organization, that was off the back of not getting the role. But two things happened. Number one, now in hindsight, I'm glad I didn't get that role, because it would have been actually quite a choppy transition. I really don't think I was ready. And now in hindsight, that wasn't my career path. I absolutely love what I do now, and I would never be in this role if I had gone the other way. I said two things happened. I can't remember what the second one was. But anyways, super happy. But it was at the time it was so crushing. In fact, it was so crushing, I'm pretty sure I left the office and I did like such an ugly face cry to the tube station at Canary Wharf. But honestly, I don't even think twice about it. I'm actually really happy it didn't happen. And actually, there's magic in there, because someone called me in and they're like, aren't you pissed off? And you should have gotten the job. And I was the mature Izzy, and I said, no, it's fine. A decision has been made, and I'm just going to go with it. When inside, I was just like, they made the wrong decision. This was my job. But it was in that reaction that people saw how I behave when things aren't going well. And so I do encourage you that even if you're pissed, you can be annoyed for 24 hours. That's my rule. 24 hours, be angry, do what you need to do. But the minute someone says to you, how do you feel? You're like, great. Great, it was the decision that needed to be made. I'm obviously disappointed, but, you know, I'm a team player.
Amazing. Another request for advice. How can young black talent trying to move up in the corporate world distinguish the difference between racism or microaggressions versus critical and helpful feedback?
Gosh, that's a good question. Oh, I mean, that's a whole other session. I feel like that should be the next session at BYP. I mean, in a nutshell, you're always going to get feedback, right? I think that's one thing that you have to get used to throughout your career. You are always going to get feedback. It's how you receive it, right? I often talk about the distinction between constructive feedback and perception, right? You're always late, perception. I always have a feeling that you're just like, you know, so, you know, like, I don't know, disorganized, you're not engaged, blah, blah, blah. Something that's like more of a, you know, characteristic. It's a perception, right? Do I take it personally? Not really. It's your perception. I can't change what you think. Actually, I can change what you think. So someone once said, Izzy, when you come to the meeting, I feel like you're all over the place. And I said, oh, really? What gives you that impression? Well, when you come to a meeting, you have too many papers. And I thought, too many papers? I said, but in the meeting, do I like contribute, you know, do I make sense? Am I articulate? Yeah. It's just that you have too many papers. So I thought, this guy thinks having too many papers means that I'm disorganized. And I said, okay, well, so what's the ideal number of papers? He's like, 2. So literally, for every single meeting that I was with him, I would take 2 pieces of paper and put it down and be like, 2 pieces of paper. And then you check in with them and you get feedback. Hey, did I seem more organized? Yeah, you only had 2 pieces of paper. I'm like, okay, fantastic. Perception done. Time is up, okay. Whereas constructive means that it allows you to operate in a better way than you have been. And if it is constructive, in the gut, in your gut, you know. because you actually know what you're good at and what you're not good at. You don't need other people to tell you, right? So you're going for the perception, that's easy to deal with. The constructive, brilliant. Okay, how can I do it better? Give me an example of how I can do it better. Will you coach me 2 sessions? Get them invested in helping you fix that issue. All right, we're out of time. I'm so sorry, but thank you very much. Thank you.